Welcome to the Soulful Surgeon Podcast with Dr. Lisa Hunsicker, a sanctuary for healthcare workers. In this space, we honor your stories, your struggles, and your triumphs. Here, you are more than your role. You are seen, heard, and celebrated. Join me as we explore conversations that nourish the heart, elevate the mind, and remind us why we chose the path of healing. This is your time. This is your place. This is the Soulful Surgeon Podcast. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Soulful Surgeon Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Lisa Hunsicker. This is the place where healthcare workers come to be seen and heard. Now, it's been a little bit since I've done a podcast, and it's been nice. It's summertime here in Colorado, and we've been out. We've been on vacation, and work is slowing down a little bit, so it's nice to take a gentle pause. Now, it's interesting because I recently went on vacation. And instead, we had planned this big vacation that was about 2.5 weeks going to Indonesia. And within a very short time of arriving there, I found myself in a dive chamber with decompression illness. So really, this was not what I expected. This was a diving trip, and we had planned to dive the entire time. And around that same time that was happening, we had gone in a few days early, and I developed a head cold as well. So I was coming down with some travel cold on top of decompression illness. So, well, I don't recommend this as a vacation. It really made me think about the habits that we are doing in our everyday life really play a role in when life throws you a curveball, especially when it's health related, whether or not we survive, we thrive, and we're resilient through that. And so I want to talk about that today. And, this really kind of plays into the 7 remedies of being. And this really is how we've talked about paying attention to your health, paying attention to your mental health, your spiritual health. Also, your intuition, really paying attention to your gut feeling, but also how do you communicate with people? How do you communicate with your family and friends? How do you communicate with your colleagues, with your community, all the social things that you do, but also why are you here, right? These are the things that we always focus on. And really, I like to think of these as really depositing these in for when a hard time comes up. And so, for me, this really came about as this was a big withdrawal that was taking away from my physical health. So we went to Manado, which is in Sulawesi, Indonesia, and it was beautiful. The beach was lovely. We were oceanfront the entire trip, and it was fantastic. And no rain, full moon during the time. We have good views of sunrise, sunset. It's everything that you hope that your vacation is going to be. We're with friends that we typically dive with. So the people that we love to spend the most time with are actually joining us. And really everything is fantastic. And we chose to come in early, which, not always are we able to do that, but it really allowed us to decompress and really relax, get over the jet lag, and try and prepare our bodies for diving because it is a very physical sport. One thing is also to be very hydrated. And so we wanted to make sure we weren't dehydrated from the flights. So we did a quick shore dive the day before the big diving event started. This was relatively shallow. But this was just to check our gear, make sure everything was good. And then the second day, everyone at the resort were ready to go. And really, we were having a fabulous day. We did 2 dives. There was nothing that was particularly unusual about them. They were relatively unremarkable dives. We had good dive profiles. We had safety stops. We had time in between the dives. And after the second dive, we came in, we had lunch, and everything was fabulous. And literally, as we were walking to get on the boat for our 3rd dive, all of a sudden I started to get an aura, and I get migraines. And so I was like, oh, crap. You know, I'm going to lose my vision. And so if I don't get to the room and lay down, I'm going to have a raging headache. I'm going to be potentially throwing up, and I don't want to be doing that on the boat. Worse off, thank God this happened before I got on the boat, because that certainly would have happened. But if it had happened a little bit later, I could have been underwater and losing, my entire one side of visual field. Right. So imagine trying to be underwater communicating. I'm having a migraine. I can't see anything. I need to go up, but I can't see my gauges. As luck would have it, it all happened before we actually got on the boat. And so my wife, Krista, was with me and our friends were with me. And I just said, look, I got to go lay down. And everyone was very kind and like, okay, well, we'll see you after the dive. So I went and I laid down. And within a short period of time, and I guess maybe this is around 30 minutes, I started to develop this itching on my side and on my trunk and a little bit on my belly. And within a short period of time, I thought I was having maybe an allergic reaction to something I ate. But really, this turned out to be decompression illness. And I had this incredible reticulated pattern of this purplish blue rash with some redness around it as well. And it was expanding all over my torso. So I looked at it. I thought, crap, I know exactly what this is. And it's what, every diver does not want to see, because this is going to affect how we dive and what we do for the rest of the trip. And I'm on vacation and I just don't want to have a problem. I want to be diving. I want to be relaxing, but I know what this means. So, fortunately, we went to the dive shop. I got on oxygen right away. We called the appropriate people, and then off we go to the hospital in a third world country. And that in and of itself was quite an adventure. But nonetheless, I got diagnosed with DCS2. I had some nausea. I was dizzy, still a little bit of a headache, but I had this crazy rash. So I met with the doctor there, and she was fabulous. And she said, I know this is not what you want to hear, but you need to go into the decompression chamber. And so we go, and I felt pretty lucky because the chamber was about 30 minutes from where we were at. But there was another gal who had been traveling for almost 2 days to get to the hospital. She was from a remote island, and she had to take 2 ferries plus an 11-hour car drive with all her luggage by herself. And she was not on oxygen at all. So all the things that we think about on how to treat decompression illness, the first thing is going on oxygen. And she had been without it for 2 days. So we were waiting for her. And then the two of us dove. And I had a little bit start of a head cold as well. So now we're going into the chamber, and man, this is no joke. So I had first we did a table 6 followed by a table 5 the next day. And we had these masks, which were like old fighter pilot masks with these big, it's almost like a P-100 mask with these big ports on the side and these big heavy tubes that were pumping in oxygen and then removing the CO2. And it had to be a really snug fit, but it was really old, and it just didn't conform to my face very well. So I had to hold it against my face, and the tubes are really heavy. And so if you let go of the tubes, your head would just drop down. So you had to support the tubes and hold the mask. And so that was for about 5.5 hours in total. And, it really took, it was an incredibly physically demanding kind of thing. It got super hot as soon as we got started. When we began to dive down, we went down to 60 feet and then had the slow recompression back up. And so it was interesting because they pumped all, the chamber, and it got so hot and humid. And so we went from being average temperature to being almost soaking wet almost instantly. And then they had an AC, and that did get a little bit better, but it was so hot. And, this gal, gosh, she nearly syncoped before we got in there. her pressure was very, very low in the 60s. We were giving her IV fluids. And so, in some respects, I was there as a patient, but also trying to oversee some of her care to be sure that she was being taken care of. Because frankly, I didn't know if I was going to end up doing CPR on her in the chamber. So we continue to do this. And I think it really took all I had. It's very claustrophobic in there. It's a tight space, but really having the mask on and having to breathe, and it makes you very dizzy. And I was tired. I was having trouble breathing, and you know, it just was uncomfortable. They have a movie that they were trying to play, but I couldn't really see it. We couldn't really hear very well. And so what it provided the opportunity for me is to begin to do deep breath and do meditative work, which, I meditate every day. And so I start my day, I wake up in the morning, and the first thing I do before I start anything, I don't look at the phone, I don't look at, what's going on in my day. I simply get up and then greet the world with meditation and just sort of set my nervous system for the day. And certainly breathing is a very big part of it. So I had to really focus my mind. And, we do this all the time in our practice, right? We separate from our feelings and we separate from the emotion of what's going on, and we're able to really concentrate and do this. But the practice of meditation really allowed me to put myself in the headspace of not feeling claustrophobic, closing my eyes, breathing in, and really having a good mindset about what this oxygen was doing. And it wasn't until later that I found out that part of this, with this rash that I had and my symptoms, it's very likely that I have a PFO. And for those of you that don't know what that stands for, it's patent foraminovalee, and basically that means a hole in the heart. And so what had probably happened is at some point, the nitrogen bubbles, as they were coming out of my muscles in the normal process, instead of going to my lungs, it crossed through my heart and went to my brain. And so, I could have stroked, but, I was in the chamber really not knowing exactly what was going to happen because, you're in the midst of this, and this is a neurologic process, so I'm not even at my best. But, it was wonderful to be able to pull back and do what I know, which is how to meditate and begin to envision me clearing bubbles, my brain, my lungs, my muscles, my heart, everything being cleansed, and just really beginning to focus on that. And I really feel like this gave me the opportunity to really assess, because you have 5 hours that you're not doing anything. You're not going to fall asleep, and you have, the chamber attendant, tapping your shoulder like, hey, you need to breathe deeper, or not so hard, and don't give yourself a pneumothorax, and don't breathe too shallow. Really, you have to do all this. So you have plenty of time to be focusing. But what I realized during this was that, I've been exercising for years. I do yoga, do some weightlifting. We try and walk at least a couple times a week, especially trying to get the sunset walks, really to just separate from our phones and patients and work and just be. And so, from a physical standpoint, that really contributed to this. I prioritize sleep, and I've really changed my sleep patterns. And, my timer goes off on my phone every night at 9:00. It's like, okay, time to start winding down and try and be in bed somewhere, between 9:30 and 10:00, depending on what I, can and can't do and what my schedule is. I've also really prioritized nutrition, and this is something that I didn't really do as a young person. And I think that especially during training, you just eat, it's the eat when you can, sleep when you can, and you just put whatever in your mouth. And that really has changed. I really have focused on that. I was diagnosed with celiac in 2012. So my diet drastically changed. And, the more that I do cancer, the more that I realize that, uh, nutrition does play a role in that. And so I've really modified my diet. I've tried to reduce my stress, and certainly with meditation and mindfulness, I really work on that. And also my approach to saying no, right? Because we're so used to saying yes, and sometimes you just have to say no. So really trying to do that. But you do that day in and day out. You don't really think that that matters. And you're like, what am I doing this for? You know, I could just sit back. I could have, several glasses of wine. I could have this big, huge meal. I could have all these desserts. I could lay around. That would feel so much better. But, would you? I don't know if you really would. But the thing is that all of a sudden something dramatic happens, and my body had to perform like a professional athlete. And I didn't really get asked if I wanted to do that. And you have a very short window of time to be able to take advantage of this. And I think the nice thing is that, with the work that I have done in these remedies, and certainly I really have to, you know, give a shout out to Patrice Washington and the Redefining Wealth community, because really I have done so much work in community and relations, and just being open and available to receive. And I think as a physician and surgeon, I'm constantly taking care of people, and I've not really let anyone take care of me. But I think it put me in the mindset to be open, that when this was happening, it was very easy to acquiesce, because number one, I knew what the right thing was. And being a diver, I totally get it. Like, I knew what this meant when I looked at that. It meant I wasn't going to die for 2 weeks while I was on vacation. So my whole vacation was changing it, which was not exactly what I wanted to, hear or do. But, off you go. And so you're making all of these deposits into your physical and your mental health. And at some point, there's something the universe is going to throw at you. And maybe you see it coming, maybe you don't see it coming. And really, we're exercising, we're eating right, we're sleeping, we're managing the stress. The relationships that we have with people, I have a very different relationship with my wife than I had maybe 10 years ago, because I'm open and available. And I wasn't trying to hide that. I was inviting her into the participation of like what's happening to me. And I also allowed her to come and join me. And it also opened me up for being available for recovery. And, this also plays into all the preventative healthcare that we do. And, all of a sudden one day you're having a major withdrawal out of this, physiologic bank account. And you don't get to pick if it's illness or if it's cancer, or, maybe you get hit by a car. Maybe you have to have a surgery. And I have colleagues who have very poor care for themselves. They don't sleep. They don't eat well. They're constantly on the go. Their adrenals are torched. They're, if they have any cortisol to make, if anything, and they're go, go, go. They have medical ailments that they really don't pay that much attention to. And then they need a surgery. And on top of those surgeries, another physical issue presents it, and they can't feel their hands. So you have old stuff, you have a chronic issue that needs your attention, and then you have an acute issue that maybe makes it that you can't even do your job. And so all these things come. Maybe it's COVID, maybe it's long COVID. Maybe you're pregnant and you have a difficult pregnancy. Maybe there's a family crisis. Maybe there's something, with your kids. So all these things that are going on. You can't ask yourself in that moment, okay, what do I do? How do I become instantly healthy? Like your physiologic bank account has a balance, and whatever the issue is going to take the withdrawal. And it just depends on, are you going to have enough in there to have a reserve afterwards? And I think that this is something that we have to really focus on, because this is really what builds resilience. And I think as we're busy, we kind of think about, God, I'm so busy. I just don't have the time for this, or, I'll get to it later. And I think that we are so prone to, this delayed gratification, but we also have this delayed kind of self preservation as well. Like, I'll do my mammogram next year. I'll do my colonoscopy next year. I'll sleep once this rotation is over, or I'll sleep when I shift off, and I'll eat better after call on this weekend. And, I had one of our nurse anesthetists who called me a few years ago, and she said, Lisa, I'm making the call to you that I wish I, have would never make. And I said, what's the matter? And she said, I have breast cancer. I said, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And she said, yeah, it's pretty big. It's about 8 centimeters. And I said, oh my gosh, this must be a really fast growing tumor. Um, you know, when was your last mammogram? Trying to get a sense for how fast it would be replicating. And she said, well, it's been over 5 years. And so you're like, oh, we know how to do this. And I said, I don't understand. Like, you do this with me. You know how this goes. Why did you not do that? And she's like, well, I was so busy. I never really made time for it. And so I think that we spend our time all the time taking care of everyone else, but we're slowly draining our own reserves in that process. But if we're not putting any, effort into restocking and depositing into our own physiologic health, then this isn't going to work. And I think the thing that we have to remember that, this is just like our 401ks, right? We start early and we start depositing in there because at some point we're going to need to take a withdrawal out of it. And if a hard time hits, we can do it earlier and we're going to live on it later. And I think that's the same thing here. We're going to keep putting these healthy deposits in. And along the way, there will be some withdrawals. And hopefully it's not, a Mack truck hitting you and then it's game over. And those things you can't certainly prevent, but all the rest of the stuff for, doing the best that you can. The thing that was very remarkable to me, and I think it had a lot to do with my mindset about this, is living in a place of gratitude. And I think this is a spiritual thing and a meditative thing that, I start my day and I close my day with gratitude. And I really was very grateful. I was grateful that the chamber was very close. I was very grateful that I wasn't harmed enough to where it impaired me to getting to the chamber. I was very grateful that I had the option of being recompressed. It was no fun, but I was grateful I had the skill to be able to make that a tolerable experience. What also was really, really important is I was grateful to be where I was at, which was in Indonesia on the beach. So as a recovery, 2 weeks at sea level without flying beachside, I could snorkel. I was physically fit to be able to tolerate 2 rounds of dive chamber and pretty much the next day hop in the water and be mindful and careful with my body, staying within the parameters that they wanted me to. But staying on the surface, I was able to enjoy my vacation. I was on world-class reefs, right? Whether I'm above or below, it was phenomenal. And I had time with my wife. And, this is another communication thing with our, with the way that we talk to people. And I was really upset because I felt bad that my wife had to sit around for 5 hours the first day and then another 3 hours for the next day doing the dive. And she was like, "No, this is no big deal." And then she could have dove the whole time, but she chose to spend the time with me snorkeling. And I let her do that. I was open and available to that because I really did have some guilt about that. I'm like, gosh, I didn't mean to ruin your whole dive vacation. She said, look, this is our vacation and I want a vacation to spend it with you. And whether we're above the water or below the water, we're going to enjoy it together. And that way, I'm sure that you're okay and I'm enjoying you as much as what we're doing. And so I don't know that I would have necessarily been in the place for that. And looking back 5 years ago, I think I might have had a very different approach to this whole situation. And perhaps what may have happened is I might have been one of those divers of like, just put me on nitrox and I'm going to go down. It's just the skin bends. I'll be on a little bit of oxygen. If I even mentioned it, because there's a lot of people who don't even do that. And I certainly might have been very angry and bitter and even hostile and not impressed or grateful to be in a third world country ER. Not grateful that I was 30 minutes to the dive chamber. And certainly not grateful to spend it, for 5.5 hours and then 2 later. So the thing is that really changed this whole approach. And so I enjoyed Indonesia. I had a fabulous time. And it's not because nothing happened. It's because my body had the capacity to tolerate what happened. And I had the resilience and the extra to be able to give to it, that I was able to deal with decompression illness. I was able to deal with the cold that I had on top of it and recover enough to be able to have a very nice vacation. And so, I want you to really think about this. Tomorrow, if something happened to you, are you ready for it? Are you mentally ready for it? Are you physiologically ready for it? It's never going to be perfect, right? We're never going to have a perfect response, but will you at least be ready? And will you be in the mindset to take it on? Will you be in the place of gratitude to give forth whatever you have to give to that? And for whatever response that your body has to give, be grateful for that and be ready for the next challenge. And I think we have to really think about that. Again, like we talked about with the 401k, we put so much time into that. We have to put the same effort into our own physical health. And it's not just investing once a month, but it really is daily with all of these things. Every healthy meal we eat, every walk, every workout that we do, every good night's sleep, all the doctor's appointments that we may or may not want to go to, every moment of recovery, those aren't expenses. Those are actually our investments and our deposits. And then someday, and it's not if, right? Because this is going to happen to all of us. It's when life is going to ask us to do something extraordinary. On that day, you're going to be grateful for everything that you have put into that. And so I invite you to think about that and really take inventory of what you're doing and really ask yourself, what am I doing? How full is this physiologic bank account? Because it really doesn't, no matter what we do, your health doesn't guarantee your ability to avoid illness or injury, but it does help increase your resilience to be able to endure it. And so I want to leave you with that thought today. I hope everyone is having a great summer. I look forward to hearing the comments and reaching out to me on DMs. You can reach out to us on soulfulsurgeon.com if you have any questions or any personal stories that you'd like to share with me. And thank you all and have a great rest of your day. Thank you for joining me on the Soulful Surgeon Podcast. I hope today's conversation offered you reflection, encouragement, and a reminder that you are not alone on this journey. If this episode spoke to your heart, please share it with someone who might need it as well. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a moment of connecting with healthcare workers all over. You can find us on the web at soulfulsurgeon.com. You can find us on Instagram at Soulful Surgeon. And you can find us on LinkedIn at Lisa Hunsicker, MD. Until next time, take care of yourself the way you care for others. And remember, your story matters here.